What makes us relate to a story? And what makes us relate so strongly to the people within those stories as if they were real? The desire to tell stories as a way of communicating to the rest of our culture is the tried and true method of forming deep bonds, communities, and even strongest so, families. We tell stories about humanity and about the truth of our humanity. Stories of great triumph, stories of legendary status, epic tales like the Iliad and the Odyssey, telling us how great mankind can truly be. Humanity is quite a mixed bag, though, and for every treat inside, there's a wicked trick. We have bold, happy stories, but we also have terrifying, somber tales. Grim tellings, dark fantasies brought to the surface, brought into reality. Yes, I've recently been exploring two stories notoriously decrepit and just as much real as they are surreal. Silent Hill 2 and Crime and Punishment. Their tales wind equivocally like a roller coaster and spin you around, but in the prison of your own mind, not just reality, you see. What you see along the way, though, oh God, is it scary. Both stories drag you down and down, further and further to the bottom, the absolute bottom, and you learn the feel of rock bottom. You learn the sight of rust and blood. You learn the sounds of those people tortured by their own minds. And you learn the smell and the taste and the thought of murder. But amongst the suffering, we witness through James and Raskolnikov something more, something beyond suffering. They suffer with meaning. They suffer as liminal fuel towards the truth. A succession of numerous pains and sufferings, like the pain we all go through. But not in vain, you see. Not in vain. It is precisely that truth that we find in both stories. James and Raskolnikov are both walking alongside us on our journeys to seek the truth. They both were misguided. James suppressed his crimes, and Raskolnikov possessed by demented ideology. Just as we all do at times, they sunk down and down into the house of Hades. What our parents never told us, you see, is that once you're there, you bring it back to the surface. In other words, regardless of if hell actually exists for certain wicked people as their afterlife, their torment, ever present, starts well before that. They live through hell on earth, haunted by their crimes until they find the truth. That version of hell is exactly what Dostoevsky and Team Silent show us in these two macabre texts. Just like the greatest of stories, these two stories give us a framework for how we can build upon our lives, enriching ourselves with new truth. I want to investigate ways that Silent Hill 2 and Crime and Punishment offer us insight into our own minds. My goal is to find more nuanced perspectives on how crime affects us, how we deliver our own punishment, but how we can deliver ourselves out of that punishment and redeem ourselves. My name is Christian Garcia, and this is what Silent Hill 2 and Crime and Punishment teach us about redemption. As a preliminary synopsis, Silent Hill 2 is known for taking inspiration from Crime and Punishment. The stories have many parallels, touching on themes of how isolation affects us, hiding from the truth, is murder justifiable, etc. Both protagonists are hiding from their actions and unable to grip with reality after committing murder. Both protagonists had troubles in life, causes for the horrendous acts they performed. They both chose to hide behind their own justifications and excuses.
That's ridiculous. I never.
And as they find out, the torment of not taking responsibility for their actions has manifested a form of hell to them. James and Raskolnikov both spend most of the time we see them experiencing the aftermath of their dirty deeds. Their punishment. They live in a deep torment. Instead of the thriller of asking who done it, we witness these troubling aftermaths of their murders. And the question is more psychological, asking, why done it? We may not all be murderers, but we could be. So, by asking why done it, both stories ask us, the audience and the player, if there are justifications for murder, if we deserve to live after overstepping moral or societal or legal boundaries, and if we would even be successful in trying to live after overstepping and committing atrocities. We all make mistakes, and everybody has chosen to cross the line before. Consequently, receiving correction or punishment for our transgressions, however big or small, is a huge part of life. Silent Hill 2 and Crime and Punishment both explore how we respond to the choice of good versus evil, how we respond to whether good and evil even exists, and how any person can become possessed by an extreme ideology in the right conditions, and how devastating such extreme ideologies are. Dostoevsky and Team Silent have only just begun to reveal what kind of real-world context and dark themes they've got in store to the keen eye. What happens when somebody commits murder? Do they suffer for their sins, either in their secular context or in their religious context? Is punishment necessary? Is punishment even real? That is also to say, is crime real? When we choose to believe it doesn't, that would mean right and wrong don't exist on a fundamental primordial level. They exist only superficially because we created them. At that point, even the most vicious acts can be rationalized and justified as the best action. That begs me to explore the question, what happens when you justify murder? Does suffering continue? Or does it disappear because right and wrong don't really exist? Does morality even exist? If not, is legal crime the only reason why crime is thought of as cosmic truth? Even if right and wrong exist, what about a more difficult question? Can crime be committed for moral reasons or even utilitarian reasons? A horrid act may be a legal crime, but who's to say there was moral transgression? A moral crime committed in that scenario? What if there was more to gain as a society from murdering a genocidal ideologue like Hitler? What if there was more to gain as a society from murdering an abhorrent pawnbroker leech? One answer to these questions is very clear. Whomsoever dares to transgress the dark line of crime, their mental health is in grave danger. Illusions, dark fantasies, twisted nightmares, as well as declining physical health seem not too far behind in transgressions such as these. We all have our own experiences, our own transgressions we can use to relate with characters like James and Raskolnikov. Then so, we must ask the ultimate question: can we be redeemed from our suffering? And how? Everyone has their own way, surely. But I have noted 3 paths everyone can take at some point. 1, they confess their crimes either to their family and loved ones. 2, they confess to the legal system. Or 3, to their God, religious deity, or through whatever spiritual lens the individual has. The most integral step towards redemption, though, is to confess to ourselves. Admit our wrongs so that we may understand them and learn from them. Silent Hill 2 and Crime and Punishment both give us insight into our own minds, allowing us to confront the most evil transgressions of life, preparing our minds and bodies and souls to defend themselves from the dark arts evil employs to possess us with dangerous ideologies. These more complex themes can be assessed and extracted out of clues Team Silent and Dostoevsky leave us in each story. Let's break down each topic of discussion, following the characters and symbols as clues to find powerful motifs so that we can extrapolate each theme better when the time comes. Imagine the dilemma of a painter who's been tasked to recreate the image of the devil, the demons, and the savage monsters all threatening the village. Everyone is turning into mindless vessels for carnage. In an effort to save everyone, he accepts the challenge so that his town may know what evil looks like and become better equipped to deal with those threats in the future. That artist must confront the abyss itself in order to understand it. He's afraid. He knows, though, no matter what, he will keep searching for victory. There's 14,605 ways he could succumb to evil and perish before he even had the chance to return home. But there is also one in which he survives. Finally triumphant, the artist comes back stronger, having outwitted evil itself. He furthers himself spiritually, mentally, and physically, and helps further civilization with his new insight. His village might have the means to grow and invent new technology to keep the monsters from the dark at bay and survive for another millennia. This mindset of looking into the belly of the beast to seek the truth is why Fyodor Dostoevsky and Team Silent would create texts that are so disturbing, yet so insightful. Analyzing both stories has helped me look at problems I may have in my own day-to-day life. Instead of suppressing thoughts and memories, I feel urged to grab my paintbrushes like that courageous artist and be willing to stare into the abyss and be willing for it to stare back into me. Is that a dangerous act? Yes, it is. But, as Carl Jung thought, individuals become victims of some form of unconscious puppeteering when they choose not to face their own inner abyss. They'll be guided around in life by forces beyond their control, yet, paradoxically, coming from within their own mind. The degree to which this psycho-zombie is affected depends on how little the unconscious mind is explored and understood. Both texts are inherently psychological studies, so they need to be analyzed with a psychological lens on top of the traditional literary lens and narrative lens and gameplay lens for Silent Hill 2. Each analytical lens overlaps with another lens at almost every point of great drama and tension, providing more layers of context into our two protagonists, James Sunderland and Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov. We're going to follow a 3-act structure. First, crime. Why did James and Raskolnikov commit murder? 2. Punishment. How are James and Raskolnikov tortured for their actions? And lastly, 3. Redemption. How can we save ourselves, find self-respect, peace, and even happiness amongst our transgressions? Book 1. Crime. Why did James and Raskolnikov commit murder? Let's start with James. James's wife Mary was suffering from a terminal illness. Given 3 years to live by her doctor, she couldn't handle the stress of knowing her days were numbered. Mary succumbed to the torment, lashing out at James due to her deep rage. She felt bitter and defeated. It was simultaneously so that James grew hatred in his heart for Mary, despising her, and ultimately he took his deepest pains out on her, as she previously did for him. James's selfishness took over him in that moment. In that morally destitute state of mind, James murdered Mary. He resented Mary for taking his life away from him. All he wanted was his life back. No more hospitals, no more bitter wife. He could date women again and feel pleasure again without any chains holding him back. James tried to believe a delusion that he was acting with moral righteousness. Mary told him she wanted her suffering to end, so naturally, James had the right to oblige. But, depending on which of the 3 original endings you get, James either admits this isn't true in the leave ending, or Mary shrieks at him for wanting her out of the way in the Maria ending. Did Mary beg for death? Yes. Mary was suffering from the pains of grief. She probably did think of dying plenty of times. But that doesn't mean James is in the right. If you watch the leave ending, James admits that she also begged to stay alive. And in the Maria ending, you get a full picture, as Mary scolding him shows him that he killed her for his own selfish desires.
That's why you needed this Maria person? James, do you really think I could ever forgive you for what you did?
Silent Hill 2's gameplay mechanics add immersion and help reinforce the narrative's quality in a way that Crime and Punishment isn't quite capable of doing. This helps James punch above his literary weight class into a tragic character worth analyzing. James is roughly just as clunky as any other character operating with tank controls. James also has to double tap enemies with a swift kick in the noggin before he can rest assured that said enemy is truly dead. Think about James's battles with Pyramid Head. At no time throughout Silent Hill 2 is James ever able to kill Pyramid Head. Think about that. All these gameplay functions tell a ludo-narrative that James has a frail mind, which perfectly lines up with the story's intended narrative. Not only do players get to see James, they also get to be James. They also receive a huge catharsis when they finally uncover the truth about James's murder. This is just one reason why Silent Hill 2 continues to resonate just as well with players decades after release. Silent Hill 2 is a gem of a case study in ludonarrative unity. Each game mechanic was created to be an extension of the narrative, so that we could further step into James's shoes. So then, why would you want to have people experience being a murderer? And why not a soldier, but an average man who murdered an innocent woman, his zone-loving wife to be exact? It might be safer to mark James as other, or transgressor, or bad person from an evolutionary standpoint. Other equals bad. Bad equals threat. Threat must be eliminated before it eliminates me. Anyone's capable of becoming James after all. It's better to be safe than sorry, especially if you have a family. That pretext is hard to maintain the longer you play as James, and Silent Hill 2 makes sure we never forget it. Silent Hill's mystical ability to manifest the subconscious, full of suppressed desires, thoughts, and fears, means that discussing the context of what occurs in the town will be by nature psychological. Just like the dilemma of the artist painting the devil, the only way to obtain new intrinsic perspectives is to gather the courage to stare into the abyss, or to step into the mystical town of Silent Hill, walking in James's shoes and empathizing with his motivations. Now, let's take a look at Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov, on the other hand, committed 2 murders both for different reasons, and both providing different context into the situation in Raskolnikov's mind. His first murder, the old pawnbroker Ulyana Ivanovna, was premeditated just as James's murder was. Raskolnikov was impoverished, starving unless otherwise fed by his landlord's assistant. He wanted money to pay for necessities like food and rent. But Raskolnikov is also a young intellectual, and unfortunately, a law school dropout since he couldn't pay tuition. He could use more money to follow his studies. He wished to help his family, as his sister is marrying into wealth, and Raskolnikov sees his sister as legally prostituting herself to help save her family's financial condition. While pondering the murder in his head, Raskolnikov tries to rationalize the murder as a justified benefit to society. He claims the pawnbroker is a louse who harms others by swindling them. The swindler label is sadly true, but calling another human a louse is a pretty questionable claim. He further poses that killing her would provide a quantifiable decrease in the amount of bad in the world, which seems very utilitarian in belief. He also poses that killing her increases the overall happiness in the world, which is also utilitarian in nature, as well as a morally based justification of murder. Luckily, or unluckily, for Raskolnikov, Dostoevsky sets up a series of fated encounters for the young murderer that by sheer chance give rise to his inner demons. These encounters provide additional context outside of Raskolnikov's mind into why the murders occurred. While in the tavern at the Haymarket, Raskolnikov overhears a group of young punks justifying the murder of the pawnbroker, literally the exact act he is wrapped up in thought over. They claim it would be a moral service, even of some utility, as they could reinvest their newfound wealth back into society, lifting up the poor and helping those in need. Once committed to the deadly act of murdering the pawnbroker, Raskolnikov's description changes completely. His body moves on its own, mechanically, as if not in the same mind at that point as he was before nor after the murder. Somehow, through possession almost, the dangerous ideology Raskolnikov ponders all throughout Book 1 of 6 in Crime and Punishment has taken control of him, almost as if the ideology is in control of the axe, moving through Raskolnikov as it devours its prey. After the murder, Raskolnikov appears to re-enter his body, becoming one with his thoughts and feelings again. Once in his own mind again, Raskolnikov freaks. He frantically searches Eliana's body for her keys and rummages clumsily through her belongings. Since he overslept and additionally took too long while rummaging, he stopped dead in his tracks by the woman's sister, Lisaveta, who is unluckily cut down and met with her unfortunate demise. Adding to unlucky chance, a couple fellow customers of the pawnbroker come to do business after the crimes, trapping Raskolnikov inside the pawnbroker's dwelling. One leaves for help as he suspects trouble immediately, and the other abandons his post at the door as he gets anxious waiting. By sheer chance again, Raskolnikov can escape. The two men miss Raskolnikov by mere seconds as another lucky chance arrives, and he takes advantage of the bumbling painters arguing a few rooms over. He sneaks into the dwelling as the painters have left the room in the heat of a dispute. The first two men getting help never saw him. As Raskolnikov escaped, Dostoevsky dances along a fine line, questioning whether Raskolnikov was fully responsible for his acts. Future chapters of Crime and Punishment show his punishment, implying his responsibility naturally. Dostoevsky paints a more complex picture than just Raskolnikov's mistakes, though. Why did so many chance encounters play towards Raskolnikov's successful murder and escape from the crime scene? I dare to ask then. Why was Raskolnikov aided by fate to succeed and escape? If you don't believe in fate, then another version might pose, why was Raskolnikov aided by chance to succeed? This is a book after all. It was written intentionally with this in mind. The scene of the murder, before, during, and immediately after, feels full of breadth, yet simple in its realism, not overworked. Written in similar fashion as how Sargent might have painted the scene. Through the simplicity, the young, bi-posed murderer is still written so ambiguously at the same time. Are we meant to empathize more with him if he's split? Maybe. I think both are true and at play during their own key moments of Crime and Punishment. Raskolnikov truly felt possessed by his extremist thoughts to the point of being brainwashed into a mindless monster like a zombie during the act most cruel. This enticed me as I'm left wondering just how easily this could happen to you or to me or my family or my husband. Am I in danger? Are they? The modern world is now home to the most expansive platform for voicing free speech, the internet. From beautiful acts of humanity, such as donating to charities and live-streamed education, to evil forums on how to commit vile acts of crime. It's easier than ever to find an echo chamber for your belief system. Dostoevsky intentionally makes the line of transgression blurry in order for us to turn towards ourselves and play out his dark fantasy within our own minds, to examine what we might have done in Raskolnikov's shoes. Could you really commit murder? Book 2. Punishment. How are James and Raskolnikov tortured by their actions? Let's talk about how they are drawn to hell. Both characters, James and Raskolnikov, are drawn to the entrance of hell at the beginning of each one's suffering. Raskolnikov is insatiably drawn back to the home of the dead pawnbroker as if enticed by the devil itself. He's written as though subconsciously wandering through the city, zombified, until his senses re-enter his body and he appears at Ilyana's home. He previously heard Zosimov scoffing at how amateurly the murders were committed, causing the most sinister rage to boil in Raskolnikov's mind. Maybe he was enticed to reenact the murder. Maybe as an attempt to uncover any evidence that could lead back to him. In the moment, Raskolnikov became a puppet to his own subconscious desires and forced his body back to hell. James is drawn similarly to Silent Hill. Early on, the story suggests that James is drawn to the town by his late wife Mary's letter. This letter appeared to James, but his wife had already been dead for 3 years. Mary's letter provided James a sense of hope, along with confusion, but nonetheless hope that he could be with his wife once again. Even if Mary is actually dead, she is still waiting for him in their special place. she's waiting metaphorically, waiting for him not physically, instead waiting for him to remember his vile act and confront the truth of what he did to her. That alone might have drawn James to the town, but Silent Hill has its own spiritual power. Such power is the reason the town allows monsters and nightmarish manifestations of your own mind into reality. James might have been drawn to the town just as Harry and his daughter were in the first entry to the Silent Hill series. Further proving this hypothesis, Eddie yells to James as they face off in a gun game, "This town called you here too!" As if James was really drawn by the town. If James really was drawn by the town can be seen as fate, giving him no choice. James's destiny is to accept punishment for his sins, and it was unavoidable. This would ring harmoniously with Dostoevsky's conclusions as well. Both protagonists continue to receive a fair amount of torture, not just internal, but external as well. The manifestations, demons and monsters in Silent Hill, and drunkards and sexual predators in St. Petersburg challenge the characters. Many of these characters/creatures act as roadblocks, but a few play vital roles in aiding the protagonist. The supporting cast of both stories shine particularly bright. They play a crucial role alongside the inner hell the protagonist is experiencing. Each supporting character is an embodiment of traits our protagonist either needs to obtain or let go of. The supporting cast provides context into why James and Raskolnikov need to be punished for their transgressions. Let's explore Silent Hill 2's supporting cast. Silent Hill 2's lineup of eccentric characters provide context into how the players should feel about James, as well as show James a look into people who might be going through what he's experiencing. All the side characters who are in Silent Hill with James, except for Laura, experience their own reskinned version of this purgatory for their suffering. Let's unwind James's relationship with each side character and bite into the literary meat and potatoes behind each character's role in Silent Hill 2. Starting with Laura. James is noticeably cast down by every single character he meets in town at least once, and often more. Nobody, though, can be better at tormenting James than the queen of sass herself, Laura. Laura trash talks James almost every encounter they have. Man, she's a trash talker. She actively implies she hates James, or at the very least, really loathes him. Until the very end, where she actually hits him in the arm, screaming she hates him. She has every right to. She just found out he murdered Mary.
I knew it! You didn't care about her! I hate you, James! I hate you! I hate you! I hate you!
Unfortunately for James, Laura is the only lead to Mary's location, so for the sake of truth, he must endure the heat. James lashed out hard once to Laura. He found out quickly that hell has punishments for not playing by the rules.
We met at the hospital. It was last year.
You liar! Laura,
Fine, don't believe me.
Laura immediately deceived him into believing a letter of Mary's is in a dark room and locked him up.
It's further back in the desk.
doing?
Ha ha, I tricked you.
Open the door, Laura.
Why should I? I'm a liar, right? I think I'll just leave you like this.
You snotty little brat! Open up!
James's temporary imprisonment at the hands of the innocent Laura is symbolic of James's mind punishing him for suppressing his crime. Laura knows Mary and makes it known they have a friendly, even loving relationship. James follows Laura through her bratty torture because she's a symbol of hope that he can have his old life back. It is no coincidence that the only quote-unquote good ending from the original three shows James and Laura leaving town together. Now, let's talk about everybody's favorite murderous fatso, Eddie. Eddie, too, torments James, just not at first. He starts off rather neutral to James, becoming hostile only near the end of the Silent Hill Historical Society. Eddie is seen at first as another person confused by the supernatural nature of the town. Players get hints that in many ways, Eddie and James are parallels in some way. Eddie is first seen throwing up over a toilet, disgustingly, hurling while trying to speak with us. He claims he never killed anyone, despite the body lying in the floor in the previous room over. His statement is verbal irony, as we find out Eddie is lying and is slowly becoming a murderer. Yeah, the scene is shot in a way to express the truth behind the irony, that both of them are lying to themselves. While Eddie verbalizes his lies about murdering somebody, James is mentally lying to himself by suppressing the memory of the murder of his wife. Eddie later on states that he and James are both the same. In Eddie's version of Silent Hill, the town might have morphed James into a mean fat murderer just to match Eddie in his personal hell. The town might have also provided Eddie some kind of insight into what kind of person James truly is, either by changing James's appearance as hypothesized or by other means. Eddie's personal third act ended abruptly and forcefully as a far gone Eddie unleashes his confusion and anger out on James. Eddie has gone completely bonkers by this point of the story. Absolutely haywire. He claims, "Killing a person ain't no big deal," and laughs maniacally while confessing to murdering a dog and another human. Just put the gun to their head. Pow! This terrifying scene shows us just how available an option the act of murder has become for Eddie.
Killing a person ain't no big deal. Just put the gun to their head. Pow!
He mirrors James's murderous capabilities, which still provides irony during this point of the story. The parallel shows the path James could go down if he refuses to take responsibility for his transgression. Team Silent states it plainly and clearly at this point. Eddie is mentally ill and very, very sick. He's more murderous than ever, too far gone that it can't be helped. James is forced to defend himself from Eddie's onslaught, and James murders Eddie during their duel. Eddie's murder sets the stage for James's Act 3. as James comes to terms with murdering a real human being.
Eddie? Eddie? I killed a human being. A human being.
Both characters are murderers, but only one accepts it, Eddie, while the other denies it, James. Eddie's murder, like gears on a clock, sets the stage for the final puzzle piece to be presented, Mary's VHS tape. Next is Angela. Angela's character development runs parallel to James, just in different ways than Eddie's. She starts off nice, maybe a little dazed and confused, but at the graveyard outside town, she seems trustworthy. The second time you encounter Angela, she's lying on the floor of an apartment room, facing a huge mirror that covers the largest wall. Angela's holding a knife, simultaneously staring at the knife and the mirrored wall in front of her. James enters kindly, offering his help and advice. He pleads for her not to take her life. There's always another way, he says to console her. Angela gets up, seeming to accept this kind gesture, and asks him if he can hold onto the knife for her. James gladly accepts and steps forward to take the knife from her, but Angela shrieks, lashing out at James for taking a single step towards her. The knife is a symbol, albeit a currently ambiguous symbol at this point of the story.
I'm sorry. I feel bad. Please don't.
We know there are visual clues hinting that Angela feels suicidal, and that may be a clue into why she's in Silent Hill. The knife, therefore, could be a symbol for her suicidal behavior. Angela, jumping back in fear, presents to us the image of her terrifying PTSD she suffers from. One might interpret this as the mystic power of Silent Hill, giving Angela insight into James's true nature as a murderer. This is later expanded on in the Historical Society underground passages. Players don't know during the apartment room scene unless on a repeat playthrough, but Angela's PTSD is later hinted to be caused by the horrible sexual abuse at the hands of her father. The town, therefore, is manifesting a separate nightmare with uniquely designed monsters that roam her fiery hell. It's safe to assume that all the creatures James come across would look completely different, shaped by the trauma of the abuse she went through. Even after helping Angela by killing the mini-boss, the abstract daddy monster, she still claims James is only helping her because he's after one thing, that thing being sex.
That's not true at all.
You don't have to lie. Go ahead and say it. Or you could just force me. Beat me up like he always did. You only care about yourself anyway. You disgusting pig. Ugh.
James is quick to deny her proclamation, which is ironic because the town is literally manifesting his sexual frustrations. In James's defense, he isn't shown to be sexually advancing on anyone at this point, not even Maria, which makes Angela's claim ironic too. There appears to be some kind of conversational double irony in which both characters' statements don't line up with the reality present in Silent Hill. This helps bolster the claim that each character's reality is different in Silent Hill. It's even possible that the town has transformed James's image into some dangerous-looking monster, meant as a tool to cause Angela suffering, just like the rest of the twisted creatures in the town.
Make me sick. You said your wife Mary was dead, right?
Yes. She was ill.
Liar! I know about you. You didn't want her around anymore. You probably found someone else.
When James last encounters Angela, she's in the hotel, which is dripping wet at this point in the story. James's nightmare has changed from putrid smells and rust to a cold, overflowing and flooded hotel. Nonetheless, as James is making his escape from the hotel, he finds Angela several stairs above him in a long staircase, ablaze from top to bottom. This contrast between water and fire display how differently the two characters responded to their transgressions. James is willing to accept his actions now and pay one last respect to his wife. You can see that in the leave ending and the in water ending, either by taking Laura and leaving town in the leave ending, or by driving into Toluca Lake as to be together again forever with Mary. Angela, on the other hand, can't cope with the trauma of her transgression. Why is life fiery hell for Angela? She murdered the father who sexually abused her, and despite saving herself from suffering at the hands of a predator, a pedophilic louse, she suffers for the entirety of the game, never forgiving herself for the wrongness of her actions.
Even Mama said it. I deserved what happened.
No, Angela, that's wrong.
How sad. Angela asks James for her knife back in this final confrontation with him. This transition of ownership from James back to Angela shows she has given up hope for herself. Regardless of James's answer to her question, the player has received their hint that Angela is too far gone to be saved at this point. Understandably, James says she doesn't need it. She lashes out, accusing James of wanting it for himself so he can commit suicide. By this point, James has recently accessed his suppressed memory. He knows he killed Mary. His purpose for being in town the whole game is either completely gone now or has shifted elsewhere. Maybe then, Angela is correct. Maybe James does want to kill himself. His reluctance to give her the knife makes the knife an ambiguous symbol for the second time in the story. Does he want to protect Angela? Or is James's reluctance due to his own grief taking ultimate control of his actions? James, as if responding to the player and to Team Silent and to Dostoevsky, calmly but sternly asserts he could never kill himself.
Saving it for yourself?
Me? No. I'd never kill myself.
This is another hint towards the truth. His answer either foreshadows that James has redeemed himself through confession and punishment, or it is more verbal irony. As in the in-water ending, James drives the car into the lake, committing suicide. James is heard saying that in the afterlife, he and Mary can be together again. This accumulation of fire and ice, this pressure, pierces Angela's and James's head, providing a searing tension as they try to empathize with one another, but ultimately go their separate ways. Angela becomes manic interrogating James. The camera shifts to a first-person view of what James sees for one of the few select times in the entire game. Angela drills him with tough questions like if he could take care of her, and need her, and protect her, and love her.
No, don't pity me. I'm not worth it. Or maybe you think you can save me. Will you love me? Take care of me? Heal all my pain?
All the while, James stands and stares in silence. His silence cuts deep. The player knows from his failure to protect Mary and his failure to love her till the end that he cannot provide any of this to Angela. Not yet, at least. He may be on his way to being redeemed, but his silence shows without telling that James still has to face a formalized final judgment for his crimes. This comes in the flavor of the dual pyramid heads, followed by the haunting of Mary or Maria, depending on your ending. All Angela can say in response to James's silence is,
That's what I thought.
Angela ascends the flaming staircase as the fire grows brighter and hotter, disappearing, never to be seen again.
It's hot as hell in here.
You see it too. For me, it's always like this.
The player is blocked by in-game boundaries from proceeding further, as the fire is seemingly getting worse and unmanageably dangerous. James has no choice but to proceed onward to his final judgment. Once face to face with the dual pyramid heads, ready to clear his conscience, James sees on the stage the beautiful seductress, the archetypal Jezebel, the woman the whole game's success hinges on. That woman is Maria. Maria, the doppelganger manifestation of Mary, wreaks havoc on James during his search for Mary in Silent Hill. Maria taunts him as if he's been silly for mistaking her for his late wife.
Do I look like your girlfriend?
She accompanies him for a sizable chunk of gameplay, being sexy and energetic, but also needy and full of sassy microaggressions towards James.
Leave it. You could be her twin. Your face, your voice, just your hair and clothes are different.
My name is Maria. I don't look like a ghost, do I?
Maria treats James like this throughout the story, all the way through your last conversation with her. At first, her jokes are light-hearted. Maria pokes at James as if trying to understand how emotionally available he is for her. In her eyes, Mary is dead. Why? Well, because James told her his wife was dead.
I'm looking for Mary. Have you seen her?
Didn't you say she died?
Oh yeah, 3 years ago. But I got a letter from her. She says she was waiting in our special place.
Naturally then, as an attractive woman alone in a dangerous town, Maria's drawn to James. Her pokes at him might be part of his punishment, but she also appears to have her own soul and desires Even if the town created them, Maria's character feels less like a mere metaphysical torture device and more like something once an illusion but brought to life. Since the town birthed her out of James's desire for punishment, she has no other purpose. Therefore, if James seems to desire Maria by the end of the game, she might be looking to fill the role, so to speak.
The Lakeview Hotel? Yeah, it's still there. So, the hotel was your special place, huh? I'll bet it was.
In the Brookhaven Hospital, players witness a subtle parallel. James must leave Maria behind. Her reasoning is that she has a hangover. She's weak and coughing, as she pops a pill or two before sitting down. Maria is far less cheeky in this section in her weak state.
James. Wait a minute. I'm kinda tired. It's just a hangover.
You should rest.
So comfy.
I'm gonna go look for her. For Laura. I'll be back as soon as I can.
We don't see her again until we're in Silent Hill's Otherworld version of the Brookhaven Hospital. James returns to Maria's hospital room to an empty site, save for her pills, and the faint sounds of somebody breathing. Something haunting about this ghostly absence and ghostly breath pries into the player's mind, similarly to how the town might be metaphorically prying into James's mind. Her sickness is a hint that Maria isn't real, and that she is destined to fall victim to the same sickness and same fate Mary had. She taunts James not with words this time, but with symbolism. Her absence, sudden and unexpected, is like a symbolic death meant to mirror Mary's death. Her absence also foreshadows James's revelation that it was in fact he who murdered his wife. Her absence, paired with the faint breathing, are a small foreshadowing that Maria isn't gone for good though. James presses onward, not finding Maria again until he dives deep into the bellows of the hospital. Inside the basement's basement. She scolds him for leaving her behind. This is ironic because players know from the gameplay loop that once you leave a map behind for another map, the player usually can't backtrack. For example, when transitioning from Silent Hill's Fog World to its other world, the hospital map changes slightly. Once James is in the other world, he has no choice but to press on. Another example, a better example actually, in Silent Hill 1, where you witness the other world while outside. Once the world transitions from fog into nightmare landscape, Harry has no choice but to move on as well. That's just the nature of this town. Despite that fact, Maria still reprimands James for leaving her behind. Overwhelmed with fear and separation anxiety, Maria cries out to him. She screams that he's supposed to protect her. Team Silent uses this parallelism between Maria and Mary to show us that James isn't very strong. He likely can no better protect Maria from the terrors of reality than he could protect Mary from the terrors of her own reality. Pyramid Head confirms these suspicions in a basement hallway by ripping the life out of Maria, right in front of James's eyes.
Open up!
Not so later on. James finds Maria trapped in a cell in the underground labyrinth, as alive and sexy as ever. Huh.
You're alive! Maria, I thought that thing killed you. Are you hurt bad?
Not at all, silly.
Maria? That thing, it stabbed you. There was blood everywhere.
Stabbed me? What do you mean?
It chased us to the elevator, and then...
James, what are you talking about?
Just before! Don't you remember?
James must know, just as the player does in this moment, something is amiss. Maria was stabbed through by Pyramid Head's spear. So how is she here? To add to the mysterious circumstance, Maria's demeanor towards James has changed. She's completely ghost-like, as if her mind has been clouded by some thought, as if she's been possessed, possibly by the spirit of Mary. This Mary is not quite the same. This could be the town's doing. James might be pulling out more and more of his subconscious as he dives deeper into the labyrinth. James might be slowly recovering more and more of his memories with Mary. Maria looks at James with a straight face and then with a cold smile asks him if he's okay. If something happened to him after they got separated in the hallway.
James, honey, did something happen to you? After we got separated in that long hallway? Are you confusing me with someone else? You were always so forgetful. Remember that time in the hotel?
Maria?
Excuse me? Separated. That's a word for it. I would not have called it separated. I would have called it spear parade. Her tone becomes warm momentarily. She's extraordinarily suggestive in her tone, as if she loves or obsesses over James even more so than has ever previously been shown. Maria has slowly been transforming more and more into Mary's personality, confusing both James and the player.
You said you took everything, but you forgot that videotape we made. I wonder if it's still there.
How do you know about that? Aren't you Maria?
I'm not your Mary.
Maria effectively becomes the tool that Team Silent uses to uncover the secrets of James's unconscious. Maria works wonderfully as a mediator between James and us, the players. Since James is an unreliable narrator, players can experience thrilling revelations throughout the story, full of plot twists and character growth once the truth of the narrative comes to light. Maria's niche within Silent Hill 2 is paramount to its success. Not just from a literary point of view, but from a psychological point of view as well. Maria is not just James's perfect version of Mary. She is a picture into James's mind and unconscious. Maria embodies the primordial form, the archetype of the anima. Specifically, Maria embodies James's anima. The anima describes the inner femininity within a man. The anima also subconsciously informs men how they relate with women and feminine in general. This relating function is what allows the anima to use Maria to telegraph to the player all of James's psychological state, well before the game paints us a clear picture. All of James's experiences with his wife Mary, all of his frustrations and angers with her, as well as all of his lustful desires, therefore, are brought into focus by James's anima. These manifestations of James's anima appear as Maria. What does James's anima explain to us?
So, you're Maria?
I am. If you want me to be.
All I want from you is an answer.
It doesn't matter who I am. I'm here for you, James. See? I'm real. Don't you want to touch me?
I don't know.
Come and get me. I can't do anything through these bars.
Okay. Stay right there. I'll be there soon.
She reinforces all of our previous hypotheses about James. James is suppressing the memory of murdering his wife, and he wants life and romance and sex in his life again. But he is currently tortured. Despite James's own selfish desire to move on, he needs suffering to mend his broken soul. James can temporarily hide behind his desire to move on, and he can hide behind his desire to find lust and intimacy again. But he can't hide from his subconscious forever. James is duty-bound to serve the sentence of suffering for his sins. These themes are important for both Silent Hill 2 and Crime and Punishment. Maria teaches us that we can't run from the truth, and that humans need suffering in order to grow stronger. Who now does Raskolnikov face with turmoil in similar fashion? The most notable conflict we see him in is with the police, specifically Zamyotov and Porfiry Petrovich. So we'll start with these two. The police officers bring us the classic man versus man conflict as we witness Raskolnikov attempt to evade suspicion from the cops. Petrovich becomes an example of what Raskolnikov could be if he used his excellence for good. Characters like Sonia provide more intimate perspectives, pitting Raskolnikov against himself in the choice to follow good or evil. Sonia forces Raskolnikov to face his own crimes with courage. She wants him to willingly turn himself in. We see Raskolnikov divided in this dilemma of man versus self, just as expected from a main character whose name is derived from the word split. Let's further explore the characters of Crime and Punishment and see what insights are in store. Alright, first up, Zamyotov, a young police clerk, spoke with Raskolnikov early after the murders at the Crystal Palace while having a glass of champagne. They deliberate the murders with each other, but the conversation goes haywire. Raskolnikov just about loses his mind and entices Zamyotov with a seemingly false narrative about how he would commit the murders. Shouting and flaunting the money his mother gave him, Raskolnikov loses complete control and becomes possessed by his illness, narcissism, and rage. He treats the money as if it were stolen from the dead pawnbroker and hypothetically confesses to Zamyotov by asking, "What if I was the murderer?" Raskolnikov's behavior arouses the same tone of hysteria that Eddie shows us at the end of Silent Hill 2. This comparison shows the dangerous illness Raskolnikov faces due to his crimes. Zamyotov is hinted to tip Petrovich off to Raskolnikov as a potential suspect, which leads to trouble when the young murderer pays Petrovich a visit about his pawned goods. Petrovich is much more formidable an adversary for Raskolnikov's character. Their conversations are my favorite dialogue of the novel and the longest analysis planned out of my time with both stories. Petrovich plays the most crucial role outside of Sonia in sending Raskolnikov on the correct path towards redemption. The first time the fated nemeses meet is during Book 2, Chapter 5, during a group meeting at Raskolnikov's flat. Dostoevsky gives general but descriptive info introducing him to readers and Raskolnikov. He's fashionably dressed, but sensible and pleasant to be around. Petrovich is given opportunity to speak up. We learn that he values the New Age ideas brought by the youth, but does imply the dangers of radical thinking. His small talk sets the stage with the groundwork for his beliefs. Petrovich is a class individual, using his intellect for the protection of common people. He enters the stage at odds with Raskolnikov. Not just physically at odds. Instead, he's at odds with Raskolnikov thematically. Dostoevsky shows a parallel between intellects. Petrovich, a man intellectually powerful and who uses his intellectual power to build freedom and peace for the citizens of St. Petersburg. It is through Petrovich that Dostoevsky asks Raskolnikov, and by extension the reader, to ponder the themes found present throughout the novel. Is crime an illness and or disease? What does committing crime do to one's mental health? How does one redeem their soul from suffering? Is murder justifiable? What comes from hiding the truth? Not only does Petrovich excel as an antagonist to Raskolnikov, but he serves as a tool that supercharges Dostoevsky's writing with all the hard-to-ask questions. On top of that, the motif of fate or chance surfaces as Raskolnikov is destined to speak with Petrovich. The chief investigator even mentions in his flat that he had been expecting Raskolnikov for some time. Raskolnikov requests to speak with Petrovich about his pawned goods after his good friend Razumikhin suggests the two meet one another. Raskolnikov would have needed to formally submit a written request for his goods at the police station, as we find out, regardless of if he visited Petrovich in his flat, solidifying their fated encounter for the readers to watch unfold. The murderer and his friend enter Petrovich's dwelling, laughing. A manipulative tactic Raskolnikov employs to break the ice without causing suspicion. This strategy of Raskolnikov's is clever, but clever even more so on Dostoevsky's part. It's the first clue readers get that Raskolnikov is anxious during this fated meeting. His distress only rises once he realizes that Zamyotov is sitting along Petrovich in his home. Raskolnikov takes note that when confronted with anything even slightly discomforting, he becomes enraged. When somebody even says or does something he doesn't expect, he gets enraged as well. Even for the slight annoyance, this is true, which strikes him immediately as odd and probably not healthy. The young murderer might be onto something, although slow on the uptake. Raskolnikov is very delusional, even by this point in the novel. so his comments come off as ironic and accidentally meta, until later on when Dostoevsky confirms its intended usage with more ironic examples. Raskolnikov believes he saw Petrovich wink at him, as though to hint he knows the truth about what Raskolnikov's been hiding. Readers have just recently witnessed Raskolnikov lightly ponder about if he's unhealthy, despite knowing he's a newly crowned murderer. This makes him an unreliable source of information. I would argue this unreliability highlights Petrovich's alleged wink as even more damning. It doesn't matter if Schrodinger's wink actually occurred or not. What matters is that Raskolnikov thinks it does. And as long as he believes that the gatekeepers are watching him, he'll never be able to transcend the law. As long as he worries that the police are onto him, in return, they will always be onto him. The reader is stuck in this middle ground, empathizing with Raskolnikov and wishing for his sly escape from justice, but also his confession and redemption. Readers witness the split Raskolnikov feels amongst the same split they feel for him. Dostoevsky uses this uncertainty to illustrate how unstable Raskolnikov is. Raskolnikov's thoughts of the cop's suspicion and his nitpicking his own statements all raced through his head like lightning. Why was this happening to Raskolnikov? Because the torture of keeping up some grandeur scheme of deceit is tiresome and weighs on the mind. That's why. He's become ill, physically ill, just like his article predicted he would. And as a direct result of his crimes, Petrovich eventually steers the conversation towards Raskolnikov's article on crime, in an attempt to gain rapport and interrogate Raskolnikov at the same time. He brings the article up by exaggerating Raskolnikov's points, claiming the article stated any man could commit crime for any reason imaginable, so long as they were of extraordinary status. Petrovich's game is likely to psychoanalyze Raskolnikov, eyeing him with intent to get any damning answers in response to his already suspicious writing. Raskolnikov suspects this, thinking that Petrovich is likely using mind games to back him into a corner. The mere idea that Raskolnikov is defensive, watching his back as peerlessly as Petrovich watches him, paints a grim picture for Raskolnikov. This is proof even more of his guilt. Almost like a switch being turned on. Hearing Petrovich hyperbolize the point of his article to such extremes fills Raskolnikov with satisfaction, and his face grows a large grin. His narcissistic pride overtakes him, accepts the challenge, and a battle of wits ensues. Raskolnikov presents the points of his article with grace, like a well-prepared speech. Once through, Petrovich dives in with questions of his own. He starts off by asking, out of the blue, if Raskolnikov believes in God, and then in New Jerusalem, and lastly, in Lazarus rising from the dead. Raskolnikov does believe in it, and does believe in it in a literal sense, as Petrovich asks for clarification, and Raskolnikov clarifies quite distinctly. Petrovich isn't quite done yet, though, as he's slightly confused, but very intrigued at the thought of a completely separate class of humanity above the rest. Raskolnikov claims that extraordinary men are rarely accepted as such by the ordinary, and as such are usually executed for their transgressions against the belief systems of the time. If they survive, though, Raskolnikov contends, they may begin to execute others in the name of extraordinary change, and in the name of uttering a new word. And they often do. Petrovich is extremely engaged in Raskolnikov's answer, both in the name of evidence against him, but also in the name of intellectual stimulation. He calls Raskolnikov's answer clever, to which the young murderer responds warmly with a thank you. Petrovich continues questioning the article. He asks how to distinguish between ordinary and extraordinary. The gods among men could wear special uniforms, he jokes. Petrovich claims this hypothesis needs more exactitude on who is ordinary and who is extraordinary. Without this exactitude, anyone could easily fantasize they're extraordinary and cause massive amounts of destruction for no reason or for maniacal reasons. Raskolnikov agrees, stating that situation happens often, to which Petrovich compliments his cleverness even more so. Raskolnikov cheerfully and even proudly accepts these kind words. He also contends only ordinary people are able to mistake themselves as extraordinary, not the other way around. He's shooting himself in the foot, though, damning himself to a prophecy of false exceptionalism. He continues to elaborate with Petrovich. There really isn't anything worth worrying over. He states clearly that those who transgress without the right to will castigate themselves and perform public acts of repentance for the transgressions against humanity. The dramatic irony and verbal irony co-illuminate the scene with tension as Raskolnikov tries to conceal his two murders from Petrovich. Furthermore, the reader has already witnessed Raskolnikov dealing with the illness, the disease of crime and transgression. Raskolnikov has been suffering for his sins since the moment he arrived back home from the murder, and his castigation has only just begun. Despite Raskolnikov's reassurance, Petrovich is going to stay worried, naturally. The murders are obviously a matter fit only for him as the chief investigator of St. Petersburg. Unfortunately for Raskolnikov, his words about suffering come to pass for himself. Later in the novel, he admits that he is just another louse, like the rest of ordinary men. He questioned if he could possibly be one of these godlike, extraordinary men, and he embarrassingly fails to live up to expectation. The irony spewing out of Raskolnikov's mouth during his first one-on-one with Petrovich so bluntly slaps him in the face, and he can't even realize the relevance of what he's saying in the moment. This is likely due to his overinflated ego, his self-absorbed intellect. Raskolnikov is otherwise sick and delirious, at least partially, presumably due to his crime. Raskolnikov's article predicted this, as it states, rather boldly, that crime itself is an illness. They go hand in hand, and when you commit a transgression, this illness grows more deadly. Let's explore the rest of their battle of wits, with an emphasis on the extent of how damning Raskolnikov is towards himself. Petrovich claims some people must be drawn to the idea of becoming a god, doing anything to achieve divine status and becoming a monster. Sound familiar? Raskolnikov agrees, stating this must happen sometimes, particularly in the youth. This isn't a very good start for Raskolnikov. In fact, it's particularly damning for a young student. Petrovich asks a volley of questions to further elaborate. What happens if the police actually catch the murderer? Raskolnikov bluntly says, they get what they deserve. Well, that's quite logical of Raskolnikov to say. Logically, then, if he believes this, he eventually will remember this exact conversation down the road and realize that he damned himself to bear his suffering in his own prophecy of an article. Raskolnikov appears to be breaking the fourth wall just to tell us that he knows he must suffer. Petrovich goes on. What happens to the transgressor's conscience? Raskolnikov scoffs almost, asking why Petrovich even cares about matters like that. The humanity of it, is his answer. Readers understand by this point that Petrovich seems to care about the outcome of humanity and uses his intelligence and wisdom to help the betterment of it. Paired next to Raskolnikov, the young student appears much colder, despite previously being upbeat about debating the contents of his article. Dostoevsky hinted at Raskolnikov's anger as a symbol before, and now begins using his outbursts of anger and annoyance in the hopes that we've already caught the clues leading up to this boss battle. When Petrovich mentions morality and the conscience suffering, Raskolnikov's mood changes completely, even if just momentarily. In response to Petrovich's question of the murderer's conscience, Raskolnikov quickly asserts that if he has a conscience, he will suffer. That suffering is his punishment, as well as the prison sentence, of course. What Raskolnikov continues to say relates to him, but broadens in scope, becoming a dive into the somber truths of humanity. Raskolnikov dares to say that for anyone, even the extraordinary, if they're sorry for the victim, they will suffer. He further states that pain and suffering are always inevitable for a large intelligence and a deep heart. He goes on that great men must also have great sadness. As that last sentence is spoken, Raskolnikov speaks dreamily, as if not in the tone of the conversation. Dostoevsky does this very intentionally. This is a clue that Raskolnikov is so selfishly invested in his boss battle with Petrovich that he only just then realized the consequences of what he's spoken to the police chief. The dreaminess is a clue. Raskolnikov at that moment understood that all the words he just uttered weren't new. And worse so, all the words he uttered were simultaneously true about him. He questions if he thinks he could have really been a great man, an Übermensch above the rest. He dreams about the relevancy of his talk with Petrovich, but Raskolnikov and the reader slowly realize together that it doesn't matter if Raskolnikov is an extraordinary man, because he is going to suffer a great sadness for his sins against mankind. Petrovich is very attuned to this truth as well. Petrovich makes the bold claim later in their second in-depth dialogue that Raskolnikov will undoubtedly turn himself in, and that he needs suffering in his life. He commends Raskolnikov's cleverness and acts friendly because he knows there is more than a murderer within Raskolnikov. He sees Raskolnikov as a good man possessed by bad ideology and wants to aid his recovery back into society. Even if Raskolnikov is a murderer, Petrovich treats him intellectually as an equal and in humanity as an equal. Petrovich gives readers a taste of the shared themes of Crime and Punishment and Silent Hill 2. Humans need suffering. Suffering hurts, but it's also a necessary precursor to redeeming oneself and finding peace. Petrovich's unique role allows him to act as a mirror to Raskolnikov's twisted logos. Both have a sharp wit, yet Petrovich uses his intellect for good, while Raskolnikov rationalizes evil. Petrovich's prediction proved true though, and Raskolnikov does confess, eventually, ending the story and leaving a small cliffhanger for the upcoming epilogue. Petrovich and the upcoming Sonia complement each other too, because they both work to redeem Raskolnikov. Petrovich's bold prediction is much more devastating than Sonia's fierce begging to confess though. Petrovich's claim is reminiscent of Christ's proclamation that one of his 12 disciples, Judas, would betray him. Petrovich isn't very clear as to why he knows, but he knows Raskolnikov will confess. he does admit he won't lay all his cards on the table. A wise move on his part. Petrovich doesn't want to catch a criminal in this instance. He sees great potential in the young Raskolnikov. He knows that if Raskolnikov can be persuaded to confess himself, the act of confessing itself will be a rite of passage into the path of salvation. His previous jabs at Raskolnikov's guilt were ambiguous, meant to sound absolute, only really to the murderer, who could catch any double meaning when presented. This last statement from Petrovich, that the boy will confess, turns the table on Raskolnikov. It's either the ultimate bluff, or the evidence is plain and unmistakable. After all, there's a heap of physical evidence pointing towards Raskolnikov, and psychoanalytical evidence from both conversations with Petrovich, so in my opinion they likely would have caught him anyway. Petrovich plays the role of antagonist since he must investigate the pawnbroker's murder. Nonetheless, though, Petrovich presents himself almost as the archetype of the wise old man. He always tries to keep a friendly composure when speaking with Raskolnikov. His words run true, though, through Raskolnikov and through us. This is partially why Raskolnikov suffers from an intense, burning rage when engaging with Petrovich. Raskolnikov leaves Petrovich's with Razumikhin, but instead of stopping at his mother's with Razumikhin, Raskolnikov screams to be alone and rushes home in a sweat-soaked mess. After quickly rushing in and combing his house for evidence again, he calms down, but leaves a frenzy to enter a dreamlike state. Dostoevsky uses this dreamlike state as a symbol to show that Raskolnikov is still stuck in this otherworldly prison of suffering. The dreamlike state is particularly similar to Silent Hill's fog world. The nightmare fuel has subsided temporarily, but the dreamlike state evokes a similar tone of haziness and confusion that the fog provides to the titular town of Silent Hill. Sirens. The dreamlike state evolved from a mere symbol into a provocative motif through multiple uses, through Raskolnikov at Petrovich's and afterwards in his flat. Next, we'll talk about the sly creep, the old fat spy. Raskolnikov leaves his flat only to find the local porter pointing him out to an unknown individual. Dostoevsky depicts this man as old and fat, mentioning hints of womanly characteristics. Womanly features sound like a foreshadowing clue to me. Dostoevsky also described Petrovich as womanly briefly in past chapters. Similar characteristics between the spy and Petrovich might indicate that the spy is trying to work with Petrovich, or at least shares suspicions about Raskolnikov, and maybe on the same side, so to speak. Raskolnikov speed walks swiftly, trying to overtake the spy. He does, and they walk side by side briefly before Raskolnikov gathers the nerve to question the spy. Scared, voice cracking as he does so, the spy shouts, "Murderer!"
Murderer.
To which Raskolnikov shakes, confused, responding, "What? Who's a murderer?" "You're a murderer," the spy reaffirms boldly, and with no further explanation. He soon takes a left, at a crossroad. Raskolnikov stands there, frozen, weak-legged, and petrified. Raskolnikov being stuck at a crossroad is a genius way of symbolizing the broader plot point of the story and adding some literary depth. Raskolnikov must make a choice to go left or right, to accept that he is a murderer and tell the world or maintain the ever-crumbling secret of his transgression. We learn later that he had seen Raskolnikov when he returned delirious back to the scene of the crime. Other than that, his claim has no further basis. In fact, the old man heard Raskolnikov's conversation with Petrovich, meaning he heard the painter Nikolai confess to the crime during Raskolnikov's interrogation. As such, he later apologizes to Raskolnikov. The young murderer has avoided detection by the spy, and his crossroad has seemingly disappeared. Readers soon find out, though, that Raskolnikov is at great risk of being discovered once the police dispatch of Nikolai's false confession. The crossroad, therefore, never truly disappears. Raskolnikov walks the rest of the story on a thin line between the right choice of confessing and staying sickened. Next is our beauty, our redemptive character, our savior for Raskolnikov. Next is Sonia Semyonovna. Sonia's character is the second redemptive character to Raskolnikov, along with the previously fleshed out Petrovich. Sonia's character is the most crucial in Raskolnikov's redemption throughout the story and epilogue. An estranged prostitute, Sonia has exiled herself from regular society through her own transgressions. It is perhaps the fact that both characters have transgressed moral boundaries that we relate to Sonia and become interested in seeing both her and Raskolnikov find peace from their sorrows. Like Raskolnikov's transgressions, Sonia was in some way forced into her predicament. Both are impoverished. Both have very little resources for breaking out of the lower class. And both have reason to perform any vile act necessary to stay alive. Unlike Raskolnikov's transgressions, though, Sonia is selfless, selling her body for the sake of keeping her family alive. Raskolnikov, on the other hand, murdered, only to satisfy his own pride, narcissism, and selfish curiosity. Raskolnikov is drawn to the young woman impulsively. This is strange, as Raskolnikov has never met her and only heard of her while talking with her father. He finds Sonia's beauty enchanting, but they also relate with one another through the deep bond of being outcasts. Aside from her title of outcast, Sonia is a very clear, one-dimensional character. She remains a very respectful and kind-hearted person at almost all times throughout the novel. Although a prostitute, she can be seen giving her money to her mother to keep her family afloat, and preaching mass to Raskolnikov by reading the story of Lazarus to him. It strikes the eye as a simple, cheeky nod to common religious themes at first. But by the end of the epilogue, we see Sonia rereading the fable to Raskolnikov, and at that point we've drawn the conclusion that Raskolnikov's entire story is an allegory for the tale of Lazarus. Dostoevsky puts Sonia in the role of Christ, preaching the good word to the young murderer boy. This interesting dynamic forms then, where Sonia's practical advice to turn himself in becomes one direction in a crossroad. Raskolnikov keeping his secret and suffering anguish lies on another. Raskolnikov dares to conclude that she's already taken her own life, metaphorically. She threw her life away through her transgression to sell her body, and claims she's a murderer just like him, and right to her face as well. Despite her bad place, Sonia never loses her face with God and her morals. Sonia stays positive for both of them, showing Raskolnikov the redemptive potential within himself. Sonia can be seen as a symbol for Raskolnikov's anima, similar to how Maria is for James. Raskolnikov knows he needs to adopt virtues like honesty, and he needs to accept the suffering in order to move on beyond it. But he can't do so on his own. He's become extremely mad to the point that his body can't understand compassion or happiness or anger or any other emotions on his own. They just exist. His eros or pathos has overwhelmed him and taken control of his body and mind and spirit. In his delirium, he takes those virtuous qualities lacking in himself, like emotional balance and morality, and projects those outward onto the best candidate. And he finds Sonia. Sonia embodies a voice of reason, but also compassion and empathy, truth and love, and redemption. Not only does Sonia already have those kind-hearted qualities, but just like Raskolnikov, she's an outcast. Through shared suffering, they can relate to one another. She's a physical representation of that part of Raskolnikov's psyche that knows he's done wrong and functions as a guiding light for Raskolnikov. Sonia works so well as a manifestation of Raskolnikov's anima because they're written to be doppelgangers of each other in past decisions, but foils in how they respond to their own wickedness. You understand similarities between the two as Raskolnikov puts them. They're both murderers. Only Sonia murdered herself symbolically. So when the differences in their characters are presented, as when Sonia gives all her dirty money to her family to pay the bills, or when Sonia sacrifices her life a second time to follow Raskolnikov to Siberia, they contrast even more, as if you were already looking to spot the difference between the two. Raskolnikov's anima manifests itself in a more refined mirror image of himself in Sonia. The anima manifests this way in order to reveal Raskolnikov's inner mind to himself in a clear, unbiased manner, quite similarly to how Maria reveals James's psychology to players in Silent Hill 2. The ultimate goal of the anima in both texts is finding the truth. Why? Well, personal growth can only occur during the journey to find truth. The anima is that vital component allowing Raskolnikov to peer into his own mind and question whether or not he should be guilty. Raskolnikov starts off with a terrible approach, rationalizing the murder of the pawnbroker and suppressing the entire memory of her sister's murder. Sonia, on the other hand, accepts her suffering and is redeemed through it. Raskolnikov doesn't quite fit the bill for atonement until the end of the epilogue. Consequently, readers get to witness Raskolnikov's struggle to attain these new virtues, asking, will he do it? Until the very end. Raskolnikov's anima presents herself then in order to help him perceive the typically immeasurable depth of his own shadow. Raskolnikov needs to look into the abyss and witness a version of himself that he could never be. Decisive, present in the moment, courageous, and willing to bear suffering. He needs to take that version of himself and bear the arduous journey that it takes to meld those qualities into his own person. Sonia, by extension then, is that person Raskolnikov needs to become. This insight allows us to superimpose another image on top of the present image of the anima. Since we've already decided that Sonia, tragic yet redeemed, embodies Christ, it's not far-fetched to say that Sonia is also a derivation of the psychological archetype of the self. We've already placed Sonia in the role of the anima, or the divine feminine, so could Sonia really play another role? Dostoevsky says yes. He performs a double imagery judo with his writing to pack twice the literary punch with every sentence used. Sonia becomes a template for pure logos, a divine truth, while simultaneously juggling the weight of having Raskolnikov's anima projected onto her. This makes sense in the context of their conversations as well. Sonia was initially repelled away from the young murderer, as if instinct took over. Her inner emotions overwhelmed her with fear. Her eros, or pathos, her inner feminine instincts, rejected his anima in a sense. The way Raskolnikov related with the feminine must have been deeply rotten by the depth of the sickness brewing before and after the murders. Sonia fundamentally withdrew from him because she could feel this. It was as if something was wrong deep in her gut, as if she were in a life or death scenario. Although alarmed, something in Sonia began tugging her to remain still and attentive. She could have started screaming at this scary man to leave, fully releasing her emotions, but something calmed her from deep within. Sonia, in all her wisdom and knowledge, must have cut through the Maya and seen the truth behind what kind of man Raskolnikov could be. Sonia peered into every universe and witnessed every possible Raskolnikov, and just like Doctor Strange, held faith in their ability to guide their lives onto the one path, the only path towards peace. She understood that Raskolnikov could be redeemed. Once Sonia makes this realization, she's able to sacrifice herself a second time towards the goal of loving Raskolnikov and guiding him towards redemption. At that moment, she's able to overcome her own limitations and harmoniously connect to the divine feminine and the divine masculine at the same time. Sonia embodies Logos and Eros together and becomes a divine figure for Raskolnikov. Unlike Raskolnikov, she also does it without disregarding ethos or the St. Petersburg law enforcement. Sonia is fully realized potential. She's found a way to square the circle and transcend the suffering painted in the story's bleak depiction of Russian society. Sonia is a symbol for the self, while simultaneously choosing to balance being a symbol of the anima. One interesting note is that Sonia must murder herself both times before she can be reborn into new life. Raskolnikov rudely claims that she murdered herself figuratively by choosing to prostitute, which is followed by her being saved by Christ. Sonia is then reborn like Christ as a new symbol of the self, the divine Logos. This happens a second time naturally. Sonia must willingly choose to give up her life another time to follow Raskolnikov to Siberia. In doing so, she gives up her life to be a new symbol for the divine feminine, or in this case, Raskolnikov's anima. Her sacrifice shows rather than tells. As such, her sacrifice to follow Raskolnikov shows him an example of what human excellence truly is. It's this divine squaring of the circle, this connection of yin and yang, this integration of masculinity and femininity that entices Raskolnikov to develop such a deep love for Sonia. Sonia's character teaches readers some of the more positive themes of Crime and Punishment and Silent Hill 2. Anyone, no matter how vile, can redeem oneself through confession. Suffering isn't a hopeless endeavor. Healthy religious or spiritual practice is vital for balance and peace. And maybe most importantly, love makes suffering worth bearing. Where we find positivity in the heart of Sonia, we find something much darker with our next character, our evil, our Übermensch. That man is Arkady Ivanovich Svidrigailov. Svidrigailov is an eccentric man, full of money and wit. Acting as a vessel for evil in the name of pleasure, Raskolnikov mentions that Svidrigailov seems as though he was extraordinary, transcending the silliness of mere law. He appeases his inner Dionysus, just like the late Marmeladov, indulging in sex, adultery, rape, at any cost. Unlike the dead drunkard Marmeladov, though, Svidrigailov uses his cunning nature to act as though he were above the law. The villainous Übermensch, bent on his own sensual satisfaction, is willing to overstep any boundary in the name of pleasure. When Svidrigailov meets Raskolnikov for the first time, he proclaims his love for Dunya, Raskolnikov's sister. He offers a small fortune worth 10,000 rubles in exchange for his love. This is a mild example, but a pretty telling first impression for the man he is. Raskolnikov is right to mention that the old man acts like an Übermensch, as the old man is quick to reveal that something is quite similar between the two of them. Readers eventually learn that Svidrigailov is speaking the truth, either by his own cunning or because Raskolnikov is so deranged that it is merely obvious they are the same. The coincidence bolsters Raskolnikov's thought that the old man ascended to the realm of extraordinary being that he himself wishes he could live within. It follows suit then that Svidrigailov's claim is true as well. Both characters are the same. Both characters are murderers. Both characters were capable of vile evil and found their own ways of rationalizing that evil. Svidrigailov just about admits to raping a young girl, one who committed suicide after experiencing her trauma. He metaphorically murdered, regardless of if he ever was apprehended by the law. Speaking of law, both want to be above the law or act as though they already are above the law. Svidrigailov willingly sacrifices ethos to the garbage can in the name of satisfying his own pleasure. Svidrigailov is pure eros, pure pathos, pure emotions. He and Raskolnikov both twist logos around like a cross stood upside down, rationalizing their desires. Svidrigailov represents a harsh look at reality for Raskolnikov. This insight presented by the inclusion of this devilish old man is a clue to readers that Raskolnikov has a choice to make. He must choose between continuing to pretend like he is the fantasy of the Übermensch, or humbling himself and understanding that he will never be above right and wrong. Svidrigailov is excellently split into two distinct character psyches that are at a constant juggle, similar to Raskolnikov. On one side of the scale, he symbolizes the excellence of the Übermensch, capable of transcending good and evil. On the other side of the scale, he symbolizes the overwhelming darkness of the Antichrist. Svidrigailov as a character is built around this parallelism with Raskolnikov, similarly to roles seen in Petrovich's and Sonia's parallelisms to Raskolnikov. He plays the role of secondary antagonist. He plays second to Petrovich in the plot's progression, Raskolnikov turning himself in, but is equal to Petrovich in his ability to express the context behind what the right choice for Raskolnikov is. He's not really an advice-giving teacher like Petrovich or Sonia. Instead, Svidrigailov leads by example. A terrible example, but an example nonetheless. His actions are an example of a mode of being reciprocal and complementary to Sonia. Both side characters act out their beliefs in full consciousness and with full confidence. The conclusion, then, is that while Sonia embodies Christ, a vision into Raskolnikov's psychological self, complete and at peace, Svidrigailov embodies Satan. He is the devil incarnate, born from the same putrid yellow evil that's infested St. Petersburg, just as when we're described Raskolnikov's ever-sickening yellow flat, or the evil subclassification of prostitutes as lesser because they hold a card painted vile yellow. He is a vision into a future where Raskolnikov was either born an Übermensch all along, or overcame suffering, becoming an Übermensch in the process. Unlike Petrovich, a moral, wise old man, Svidrigailov is presented as a treacherous villain. Dostoevsky presents us with a bold statement on narcissism through the dastardly old man. When somebody succumbs to their selfishness, indulging too much in their own narcissism, that person will transgress right and wrong in a manner completely unjustifiable. Svidrigailov, in the evil he represents, is a nice transition as we conclude the side characters and talk about adversities. Let's transition back to Silent Hill 2 as well. James is a video game character, and as such, receives a more direct form of adversity in the form of killable enemies. These monsters provide roadblocks that keep James from taking the easy way out of his suffering. On top of that, there's physical roadblocks, holes in the road, and dreadful fog, all attempting to drag out James's suffering as long as it takes for him to man up and bear said suffering. After all, if the town were clear for driving conditions and there weren't demons walking the streets, nothing would be keeping James from just driving around town for 15 minutes until he arrived at the Lakeview Hotel. The winding paths that are taken are only noteworthy, though, because of how terrifying of a ride it truly is. The accumulation of physical barriers, plus living, breathing monsters, is a visceral walk straight through hell that James must willingly endure to find peace. The monsters themselves are mirrors into James's mental status. He isn't just a murderer. He's conflicted, split, just like Raskolnikov. He wants to find the heart to love his wife, but he already grew so much disdain for her that very opposite feelings emerged. The sexy nurses and sexy mannequin leg monsters are a macabre look at how sexually frustrated James felt while caring for his dying wife. One monster in particular stands out for his status as apex predator. This monster is the single most terrifying piece of nightmare fuel in all of video game design. Of course, we're talking about Pyramid Head. Wearing a bloody butcher's apron and masked behind an intimidatingly large metallic structure, this being is not just man, but the ultimate tool for punishment. His name is Pyramid Head. Born from James himself and the distorted image of Silent Hill's antiquated executioners, Pyramid Head is a physical representation of James's subconscious guilt. This dangerous stalker is James's largest adversary and a physical antagonist that pairs well next to Maria, who functions more as an emotional antagonist and trickster. Unfortunately for James, Pyramid Head holds nothing back when delivering his execution. During James's trek to find Mary, his life is at risk around the demon. James might be able to outrun Pyramid Head, but Maria can't. And he'll stop at nothing in his mission to tear James down and force him to confront the truth. 3 different times, Maria is done through. Right in front of James's eyes, another Mary is cut down and down into the house of Hades.
Maria!
Pyramid Head spears her through as she narrowly misses her escape to the elevator with James. We find her again, alive, actually, but caged inside the underground labyrinth, only to find her ripped through again on return. Pyramid Head isn't shown to be the culprit, but is stalking you down in the labyrinth nearby. The terror alone of not knowing what happened to her this time might be even more sinister than the first death. Blood shown, splattered up and down her body. No monster could have mutilated her in this way. That is to say, no one, except for Pyramid Head. The third and final guaranteed murder of Maria is the most gruesome death in the entire game. Worse than the somber viewing of Mary's death in terms of sheer visceral stimulation. James stands face to metal face with not just one, but two executioners for this final battle to the death for control of James's unconscious. As she hangs upside down, as if crucified on a flipped cross, Maria is speared through twice over as the blood rains down like a waterfall onto the foyer below. It is during this murder that James realizes exactly why the executioners have been stalking him. James needed the stalkers to punish him for his wrongdoings.
I was weak. That's why I needed you.
Do the Pyramid Heads win, though? No. Never. Not even in the ambiguous Maria ending.
I want you. I want you with me.
Or the tear-jerking sadness of the in-water ending.
Without you, Mary, I've got nothing. Now we can be together.
Why? Why? Whether or not James chooses to move on from his experience in Silent Hill, in every playthrough, he always confronts the truth. That confrontation happens once James sees Mary's VHS tape, and culminates in this encounter with the deadly duo of Pyramid Heads. He accepts that he's been punished and confronts them once and for all to show them that he will stare back at his punishment face to face and accept whatever may come.
But that's all over now. I know the truth. Now it's time to end this.
The executioners see James coming around to the truth and pay their respect to his courage in the honorable act of seppuku, as they turn the spears back on themselves and drive them straight and true through their heads. From the monsters to the executioner's Pyramid Head, we can find one common denominator. They were all born from the town Silent Hill. The otherworldly nature of Silent Hill is equally confusing yet mesmerizing. Magical yet grounded psychologically. Much like St. Petersburg, Silent Hill contributes to the ever-growing torment of those trapped in its purgatory. Unlike St. Petersburg, though, Silent Hill is much more direct in its punishment, giving those who wander into the town a terrifyingly real, hands-on experience. Silent Hill can be seen as a bridge between consciousness and unconsciousness. The dreamlike haziness of the town provides an atmosphere that gives credit to this claim. Just as with Raskolnikov's dreamlike trances, any imagery to a dreamlike state can provide us insight into the truth the creators of a text want to portray to us. In that case of Silent Hill, the fog world seen when the town is more mildly tempered is that metaphorical bridge. The town doesn't necessarily force punishment on every visitor. The young brat Laura is proof enough of that. Instead, Silent Hill's magic manifests as a psychological tool. The town has some kind of astral connection to the concept of unconsciousness as a whole. You could make a claim that Silent Hill is a symbol of the personal unconscious. The dangerous monsters birthed from the town are actually birthed from those within the town. And the town's psycho-mystical prowess are merely the artist who sculpts away until your entire unconsciousness has been brought into physical reality. While Silent Hill is a symbol for the personal unconscious, we simultaneously understand that it functions as the previously mentioned symbolic bridge, the path to the psychological entity and or psychological realm of the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious lies further than the personal unconscious and describes a form of primordial imagery that not just James or you or I, but everyone experiences regardless of their upbringing. An example is that sexy nurse demons may be a manifestation of James's personal unconscious. His personal myth, so to speak, may believe that his life cannot be lived in peace and happiness without the attention of a sexual partner. The town is able to manifest this personally unconscious desire because it has access to the collective unconscious. What does the collective unconscious version of this imagery look like then? Well, everyone alive today has been born from a mother who's also been born for millennia from their mothers before them. Naturally, we all grow to learn this as we age. Even if never told about how to engage in sexual relationships, a man of age might still have urges to release his sexual tension and further his legacy into the future of mankind. This instinctual libido, this desire to procreate and flourish with your progeny, is beyond any single man or woman. The collective unconscious, then, provides the archetypal image of the divine sexual, or the divine feminine to the town of Silent Hill. The town then is informed through James's personal unconscious about how this image might be manifested in a way easily accessible to James. Therefore, we get sexualized monsters, and even a woman, born from a wish, yet just as real as any other woman, Maria. Maria is a personal example of a larger collective image, the divine feminine, the goddess of fertility and sex. In other words, Maria is a symbol of the more godlike image of Eros or Cupid, an eternal image of love that everyone could understand and relate to. This power, whether magical or mystical or psychologically ever present, is what provides Silent Hill a potent environment and has been the catalyst for decades of new video games, movies, commentaries, and analyses. And of course, Crime and Punishment also has its nightmarish setting within St. Petersburg. From destitute living conditions to rampant poverty, to the putrid yellow color that glazes the town in washes of foggy haze, to the unlivable weather conditions naturally found in parts of Russia. St. Petersburg is the last place somebody should go looking for freedom and happiness. The town is described in such detail as a disgusting and depressing place to live. So much so that instead of feeling like a background setting, the city feels as though it has somehow been the cause of all the evil transgressions present throughout. We see plenty of examples in favor of this idea too. The Haymarket, full of thugs, radical political punks, drunkards, murderers, and rapists, is a good example. There are also the disgusting yellow walls in Raskolnikov's flat, or the jaundiced skin of the nasty pawnbroker, to the yellow cards that cast down prostitutes, who aren't just poor and broke financially. Their quality of life is poor and broken completely. This backdrop is less hands-on than Silent Hill, but grows like malice and seeps into the minds of all of those dwelling in St. Petersburg. It is no coincidence that Raskolnikov can only find redemption after leaving town to go to prison in Siberia. Prison seems like a worse setting to be trapped in, but out in the countryside, away from polluted homes, polluted streets, polluted air, and polluted people, Raskolnikov is slowly able to find peace. While your experience within the town of Silent Hill can feel like a dream, I would like to talk about something a little bit more concrete, something we see in Dostoevsky's writing. In Crime and Punishment, we witness through dreams something crazy, something insightful, and something scary. Let's talk about dreams. Do you remember a time in your life, back when you were a young lad or lass, back when your father or mother or guardian took you for a walk down the street in the countryside? Do you remember the drunk townsfolk, loud and obnoxious, that loitered down by the old tavern, speaking harshly and maniacally cheering on any violent behavior? Do you remember hearing the loud, deep thuds coming from the devilish grey man with a devilish grey beard and the devilish object in his hand as he rains down his will upon what may lie? Do you remember hearing the squeals of a dying horse helplessly lying in the street of your oh so near and dear town? Beat her to death! Do you remember those bitter words shouted from within the crowd? Do you remember the cries of those drunkard leeches who previously incited violence, slowly becoming horrified as they came to witness a beating far too severe for them to bear? She'll die! The crowd screams, realizing they went too far. Fetch an axe to her! Finish her off! You hear the most cruel spectators continue to antagonize the horse's owner. Was that real? Did he really just bash that horse's brains in? Or was it your own? Or was it my own? Is this your nightmare or mine? Is this a bad dream? Or is this a bleak but truthful look into reality? I can't quite remember. This is exactly the sickening, stomach-turning mess of a vision Raskolnikov sees within a dream of his. This dream ascends beyond the realm of dream and into what I call a vision, due to Dostoevsky's brilliant use of dreams as a tool to provide psychological insight into a character's unconsciousness. Readers see power drawn into the text of Crime and Punishment because of how potent dreams can be at revealing to us what it is we most desire. What could Raskolnikov possibly want more than any other attainable goal? Although the outspoken Raskolnikov can be noted plenty of times speaking his mind to the point of rash impulsivity, Dostoevsky doesn't just tell us what the young murderer boy wants and needs. He shows us with vague hallucinations that only become clear when presented parallel with Raskolnikov's journey to prove his extraordinary status. After all, in a morbid condition, dreams are distinguished by their remarkably graphic, vivid, and extremely lifelike quality. The resulting picture is sometimes monstrous, but the setting and the whole process of the presentation sometimes happens to be so probable and with details so subtle, unexpected, yet artistically consistent with the whole fullness of the picture, that even the dreamer himself would be unable to invent them in reality. Though he were as much an artist as Pushkin or Turgenev, such dreams, morbid dreams, always live long in the memory and have a powerful effect on the disturbed and already excited organism of the person. Within the text itself, Dostoevsky underlines his psychological imagery with this quote by qualifying his dreams with a context, a lens, of which the reader is meant to find, pick up, and use as a relating function to help understand what the dream means for Raskolnikov. This novel concept of gaining personal insight through properly researched dream analysis transcends the text that it was written in. Dostoevsky prodigiously understood that dream analyses were of utility almost a whole century before the idea was based within scientific analysis by Carl Jung. The eccentric Swiss psychiatrist Jung agreed quite strongly with Crime and Punishment's conclusions on the important role of dreams. Dreams give insight into those significant changes we need to make, the vital psychonutrients that we individually and collectively need to absorb into our being and unify within our minds and bodies and souls. Do you remember yet? Raskolnikov does. Immediately after waking up from this gut-wrenching nightmare of the dead mare. Unfortunately for him, this nightmare turns into an all-too-real daymare for the young student, as he becomes possessed by this dreamlike trance and cuts down the pawnbroker, bashing her skull in with an axe. "Good God," Raskolnikov cried. "Can it be? Can it be that I shall really take an axe, that I shall strike her on the head, split her skull open, that I shall tread in the sticky, warm blood, break the lock, steal, and tremble, hide, all spattered in the blood, with the axe? Good God, can it be?" Yes, my poor boy, it can be. The death of any life is a tragedy, at least in my own mind, when I ponder the sad act of perishing, especially when cut down like the horse or the pawnbroker. I would go so far as to say even the death of Hitler was a tragedy. For the sake of humanity, though, it was a necessary tragedy. He committed genocide. Acts of pure, undistilled evil. Something average people could never forgive. Hundreds of murders with their blood on his hands. Murders that even I would never forgive. But it is still a tragedy. The fact that his life ended rather than flourished. That it ended rather than him devote his life to a mission of peace and coming together. That it ended before he could learn the means to believe. Whether that belief is belief in humanity, or belief in God, or belief in goodness. After being cut down, only one thing is certain. If you did not have the means to believe in something whole, something true, once dead, you'll never see the silver lining of that opportunity again. One man, my heart hurts for all too well, even if he isn't real, or maybe because he isn't real, because it shows me a part of Dostoevsky that witnessed false gods, false supermen, and was tortured by their lack of humanity. This man my heart hurts for, not because he deserves it, but as Petrovich would say, because of the humanity of it. This man is Svidrigailov. Dunya's revolver laid warm and smoking on Svidrigailov's floor after she shot at him, grazing him once and missing him with the two preceding shots. Dunya was in her darkest hour, seconds away from rape at the hands of this false god, this false Übermensch, after breaking ties with her ex-fiancé. She's in grave danger, but not helpless. ℍ𝕬𝕍𝕍 and her come to an understanding as blood drips from his abrased skin. She will never love him. Ever. Ever. Surprisingly, he has a brief moment of understanding and clarity, and he tells her to make haste and escape before anything vile occurs. One single bullet remained in the chamber of that revolver. ℍ𝕬𝕍𝕍 makes haste as well, finding the young Messiah, Raskolnikov's champion of love and forgiveness, Sonia Semyonovna. He gives her a stack of bonds worth 3,000 rubles, stating he no longer needs it. He would rather her take it and invest it into saving Raskolnikov from the same fate he knows awaits him come tomorrow. ℍ𝕬𝕍𝕍 clearly poses that Rodion Romanovich only has two alternatives: a bullet in the brain or Siberia. The foreshadowing in this sentence cuts deep on a rereading, knowing the fate for the sad old ℍ𝕬𝕍𝕍. He sees his fiancée, gives her 15,000 rubles, and gives her a vague purpose to his act. Business calls him away from St. Petersburg. We learn later where ℍ𝕬𝕍𝕍 departed. First, he departed from this dimension into his dream realm, his personal unconscious. For this poor, destitute soul, his final departure is to America. Except we all know that America is the symbolic other choice that Raskolnikov was strong enough to avoid. America is the counterbalance to Siberia. America is the bullet in the brain. The decrepit man seeks shelter from a severe storm, a hint of the turmoil brewing within. He finds a cheap, sickly hotel that is very reminiscent of Raskolnikov's sickly yellow closet of a room. His attendant offered him tea and veal and any other good in service, but the old man ran him off. Left alone with his thoughts, ℍ𝕬𝕍𝕍 slowly enters his personal unconscious, drifting closer and closer to his inner mind, and drifting closer and closer to death. The old wretch's mind keeps coming back to the image of Dunya. He sternly denied himself the luxury of continuing to think of her, since she despises him, but he thinks about his sudden change of heart while with her the night before. Maybe she could have made a man of him yet. He dreams vividly. So vividly, in fact, that we witness the inception of suicide within ℍ𝕬𝕍𝕍's mind as he bears witness to three quiet, yet striking horrors within three back-to-back nightmares. Dunya's image fades from mind as a gross squirming is felt under the man's sheet. A rat darts left and right and diagonally in an effort to evade ℍ𝕬𝕍𝕍, but abruptly he awakens. This rat is the first clue that this will be no average dream for ℍ𝕬𝕍𝕍. He refuses to go back to sleep to avoid torture and starts daydreaming in his delusional, sleepy trance. A warm, countryside home and garden fills his fantasies, as he wishes for better conditions than the cold, wet, cramped hotel room he's currently found himself in. From rare plants in china pots to the beautiful smelling narcissus flowers surrounding this daydreamed cottage. This longing from ℍ𝕬𝕍𝕍 is quite telling. The narcissus flowers symbolize ℍ𝕬𝕍𝕍's wicked, self-absorbed nature. The rest of the garden and cottage scene is beautiful, but all too real to merely be a fancied thought, a mere daydream. This utterly immaculate garden scene is a clue that ℍ𝕬𝕍𝕍 isn't just daydreaming. He's actually still asleep. As he finally embraces this daydream and places himself within this fantasy, he notices a table covered with a white satin shroud. On it lied a coffin, covered with white silk and edged with a fine white frill. We soon find out that the garden and the chirping birds outside and the fresh hay that smelled pleasant while lying on the floor, the white imagery, all come together as a symbol for spring, beginnings, and innocence. What innocence and whose? ℍℍ𝕋𝕍𝕋 slowly peered into the coffin. He knew the answer to those questions. A young girl, lie face down. He knew her. She had drowned herself. She was only 14, but her heart was broken, crushed by an insult that had appalled and amazed that childish soul, had smirched her angel purity with unmerited disgrace, and torn from her a last scream of despair, unheeded and brutally disregarded on a dark night, in the cold and wet, while the wind howled. How could ℍℍ𝕋𝕍𝕋 think of such a bone-chilling description for this poor, undeserving child? How could he know who she was and why she died? Because he's the one who took her in his indulgence, robbed her of her purity. ℍℍ𝕋𝕍𝕋 raped this girl and stole the one and only possession given at birth, her purity. He snuffed out of her the breath of life from the poor girl's soul. And because of him, she snuffed the last breath of life out of her lungs and sunk down into the house of Hades. Soon after this image arose, he came to himself and stood up from the bed to look out the window. He couldn't see anything in the dark, but for some reason kept staring into the abyss. Concurrently, 2 cannons shot out, the sound signifying a flood warning for those physically and metaphorically living in the bottom. The simultaneity of these 2 events is no mere coincidence. ℍℍ𝕋𝕍𝕋 stared into the abyss, and the abyss stared back at him. The abyss itself responded, and its answer was the floodgates being released. Dostoevsky writes, and ℍℍ𝕋𝕍𝕋 ponders on all those cellar rats that'll come out, and how all the squalor men must lug all their belongings upstairs to higher stories in anger. ℍℍ𝕋𝕍𝕋 already witnessed the rat as it was prophesied in his dream moments before. Water crashing down and flooding the lower floors is a symbolic bathing and rebirth of one's wickedness. People dragging their belongings upstairs is a symbol for ℍℍ𝕋𝕍𝕋 bringing all of his wrongdoings to the surface, where it can finally be seen by the masses, and where he can finally look at it unbiasedly and act like a real human for once by accepting blame for what he's done to that sad, dead girl. The clock struck 3 just as he forgets the flood warning. The symbolic witching hour, the devil's dance, has just begun, and ℍℍ𝕋𝕍𝕋 is the sorcerer, casting magical spells upon his young female prey in the night and defiling them. Unfortunately for him, this time the devil is out for his blood. Here is where we witness the inception, as ℍℍ𝕋𝕍𝕋 becomes possessed by suicidal thought. We get hints, but never a confession of a suicidal plan. The wretch might be too scared to say the word in all of its bitter truth, powerful yet dark. Alternatively, Dostoevsky might be using the vagueness to present a more foreboding, tense presence that receives clarity and payoff during ℍℍ𝕋𝕍𝕋's upcoming act most cruel. He knows it'll be light in an hour, so he fancies leaving at once and making haste to a bush he's already picked out for the occasion, in the way an animal is selective as it chooses its final resting ground. ℍℍ𝕋𝕍𝕋 details the redemptive beauty of the bush. as soon as one's shoulders touches it. Millions of drops of water hit one's head. This beautifully small depiction makes my heart hurt for ℍℍℍ𝕋. He yearns for absolution. He would like to be washed clean of sin. He would like to make haste because his choice is to succumb completely to Satan, denying himself further life and denying himself the means to believe. Likely because after his dream, he knows he will never deserve salvation. His acts are too cruel and numerous. Had he felt bad after his actions, he might have redeemed himself well before it came to this. As such, he demands himself make haste to commit the devil's deed before the devil's hour passes. One last act of evil, but one done in the name of good, ending a murderous leech's life before he sucks the soul out of another poor girl. He departs from the hotel, looking for the attendant, but instead finds a young girl, wet and cold as if in the rain all night long, and sobbing out of fear of being beaten for destroying her mother's cup. ℍℍℍ𝕋 did the right thing, as rarely as that happened, and took her back to the hotel room. He undressed her, lied her down in his bed, and wrapped her in the cover from the head down, not in lewd manner, but instead with respect for the 5-year-old. This act is a rare instance of kind-heartedness from this dastardly old man. At this point in the story, readers wonder if ℍℍℍ𝕋 has the capacity to turn a new leaf. She falls asleep immediately, but we learn she's pretending. He was quick to leave at once again, but turned briefly before departing to see if the girl still slept. Her face was flushed from the heat under the covers, lips red, almost as if burning. He can't tell if he sees her eyes quivering. And then he witnessed a wink. Dostoevsky called unchildlike. The girl continues to reveal her secrets. She isn't sleeping. Her mouth quivers as if holding back a smile before breaking into a large, broad grin. In that face, ℍℍℍ𝕋 sees what he knows all too well. The face of a harlot. A girl this young, besmirched, her face calling ℍℍℍ𝕋 as if she wanted him. She laughed, inviting him into her. Why, at 5 years old, ℍℍℍ𝕋 muttered in genuine horror. What does it mean? She enticed him, and he cried, "Accursed child!" ℍℍℍ𝕋 lifts his hands to strike her, and finally wakes up for good from this hellish torment. He now had woken up to the fact that he couldn't live above right and wrong. He won't ever be able to avoid the consequences for his actions, even if he acted like he did no wrong. This deeply disturbing sequence of nightmares within nightmares cut ℍℍℍ𝕋's soul from his body, and he's left with nothing. ℍℍℍ𝕋 had nothing left to live for past this. In this broken state, he found a pure sense of clarity, and it couldn't be helped. It was very clear what he had to do. He sat in his chair for a moment, swiping at the flies that scurried around the sad sack of flesh, the veal sitting untouched on his table. This is ℍℍ𝕋𝕋 telling readers that he is too selfish, vain, and weak to let his body rot here unnoticed in a random hotel room. Despite him learning a valuable lesson that night, he was still unable to take his life in peace with a prayer and begging for forgiveness. Instead, he wandered the town to the park, where he noticed the bush he chose. He saw a tower, and instead chose to approach the tower so somebody could witness the suicide. He walked around until finding an official, somebody who could report the corpse to the proper authorities. He stood in front of this official, fully resolute. He witnessed the nightmares himself, after all. He knew what to do. He cocked the revolver, put it to his head, and firmly chose to cut himself down and down into the house of Hades. He mentioned his travel to the official, who wore an Achilles helmet, who ironically can't cope with the terror ℍℍ𝕋𝕋 will soon present. When you are asked, you just say he was going, he said, to America. Unfortunately for ℍℍ𝕋𝕋, America is his word for Hades. And unlike earlier, this was no dream. ℍℍ𝕋𝕋 pulled the trigger. There's no way around it. We will all suffer at some point in our lives. Suffering comes more often and more severe from wrongdoings, whether ethical wrongdoings, or moral wrongdoings, or social wrongdoings, or even personal wrongdoings. Despite that, suffering will always come, even to those not overstepping. Sometimes life oversteps itself, and one may find themselves caught in the middle. Raskolnikov is an example of that. His murder will always be his responsibility to bear. But the blame can actually be placed on many different stimuli, including him, of course. Is Raskolnikov to blame for murder? Is James? Yes, of course, and they always will be. But Raskolnikov's impoverished starvation is also to blame. One might argue with their husband or wife more unconsciously when starved all day, much less weeks without proper food. The fates and or chance are also to blame for guiding Raskolnikov to safety. Mary is also to blame for her horrible treatment of James. The truth is, in some way, regardless of blame, everybody is responsible for making things right. So thinking rashly and calling James and Raskolnikov other, or transgressor, or evil, compared to me and my family who are good, is just fundamentally wrong. And this entire discussion is evidence of that. Remember, everyone is capable of acting like Christ, but everyone's capable of being a vicious murderer like Raskolnikov. Don't fear, though. Although both stories are disturbing, and although they tell us about how dark humanity can be, they never forget that we are so much more than our transgressions after all. It can be hard to remember there's a silver lining when such a large portion of each story is so depressing and macabre. But Team Silence and Dostoevsky's use of horror help us appreciate the light even more when it surfaces from beyond the clouds. After all, Dostoevsky's original tale is paid respect and seen in the title of the 3 books written in this essay: Crime and Punishment and Redemption. The tales wouldn't be complete without it, so let's discuss it. Book 3. Redemption. How can we save ourselves from our transgressions, finding peace, self-respect, and love? What is redemption? Dostoevsky and Team Silent take us on a very intimate journey through our own heads in an effort to help average people come together against the evils created within the mind. Dostoevsky's deeply packed text is given so much flavor, like a fine cut of meat with its use of dual meanings, in a way that helps lift the heavy weight felt when reading Crime and Punishment, which is slightly long and boring at times, to be honest, but an otherwise great story. Its 6 books function like acts in a play, slowly diving deeper into the mind of a killer. Raskolnikov is interesting and relatable because the entire book we're placed in front of him and forced to observe his every twitch, his every blink, as he is consumed by guilt. Silent Hill 2 brilliantly packs literary understanding and narrative into its story well before other video games were reaching for status as captivating art. It cleverly uses psychological and narrative reasonings for its gameplay loops to keep the immersion unbroken throughout its shorter runtime of about 8 hours. James grips us for the same reason as Raskolnikov, but Silent Hill 2 achieves the same effect by going in reverse order. Players initially trust James and empathize with his desire to find Mary. Slowly diving into James's mind forces players to realize more and more that James has been lying to the player and to himself. By the end of these 2 unique horrors and pages of text, we are all left with the same question that started my research. Can we be redeemed from the evil we commit? Crime and Punishment and Silent Hill 2 both say yes. But they also both say no. Dostoevsky uses character differences to create a spectrum of beliefs and behaviors. He then uses parallelisms between characters to show Raskolnikov as well as readers where he can end up on that spectrum and where his actions can take him if left unchecked. 𝕊𝕆𝕌ℕ𝔻 is what happens when Raskolnikov acts on his intelligence but follows the ℂℍ𝕆𝕌ℕ to deadly extremes. He is the example of someone not receiving redemption from his crimes. Petrovich is what happens when Raskolnikov acts on his intelligence, but follows his intelligence to utter new words in the name of good. He is an example of someone achieving that godlike level of excellence, but not succumbing to the temptation of power. Sonia is what happens when Raskolnikov uses his intelligence to tame his emotions, combines the 2 in a way that forms the belief that everyone deserves love, and uses his intelligence to provide for those he loves. Team Silent uses the same strategies when brilliantly comparing James to his side characters. Eddie is the younger, fatter version of 𝕊𝕆𝕌ℕ𝔻. He's an example of what happens when James permanently gives in to murderous rage. A failed ℂℍ𝕆𝕌ℕ, Eddie grows more and more psychotic, showing us the devastating consequences of overstepping morals. Angela is an example of what occurs when one feels their crimes have gone too far over the line to absolve. She's a murderer, but her crimes might have actually been seen as more justifiable than James's. She did murder, but she murdered her sexually abusive father, likely to end the cycle of trauma. Despite her crimes being less criminal, or at worst, equal to James, we see her succumb to the flames of judgment. She effectively commits suicide by stepping further and further into the blazed hotel, very reminiscent of 𝕍𝕀𝕍𝕆𝕂's send-off to America. Silent Hill 2 goes one step further in displaying the spectrum of possibilities for the main character. There are 3 serious endings, 4 on a New Game Plus playthrough of Silent Hill 2, but we're going to leave the 4th out since it cannot be ludonarratively driven there on a first-time playthrough. Having multiple endings means we can compare and contrast the parallels between the different characters of James against himself, just as we would compare Raskolnikov to a side character. The entire game of Silent Hill 2 is effectively a psychological experiment asking, will the killer admit his sins and willingly accept punishment? Each playthrough is given an ending depending on real choices the player makes within the game. Meaning, Silent Hill 2 could provide a psychological study, just like Crime and Punishment, while simultaneously letting the player build their own, unique, fine-tuned psychological study. Silent Hill 2 qualifies your decisions within the game by allowing you to affect the outcome of the protagonist. James's outcome, then, is in direct alignment with what each player decision might have meant within James's mind. Every game, the game takes player choice, player direction, and player skill into account. Asking, is James acting reckless? Is James even looking for his wife? Does he even care about her anymore? Or does he just want to find another Jezebel to satiate his desire for sex and attention?
When will you ever stop making that mistake?
If a player loses a lot of health and stays near death conditions, he might receive the in water ending, committing suicide.
Now we can be together.
My interpretation is that James weighed in hard and found he could never stop loving Mary, but was too weak to comprehend the concept that he would only find life again through confession and absolution. He could not handle the weight of guilt and decided he could never go on living without Mary.
No, James. I won't let you. I'll never let you have your Mary back.
In an attempt to be with her again, and in his own pain, selfishly, he drives his car off into Toluca Lake. Revitalizing love for Mary was noble, but his cowardice and weakness meant he was never to be at peace again, until he found soothing slumber in his eternal rest under Toluca Lake.
Now we can be together.
If a player tries to find his wife quickly, relishing in any memory of hers presented, James can accept his guilt and his punishment and move on. This is seen in the leave ending, or the only one interpretable as good. My interpretation is that he finds a unique symbol of hope and future days in the sassy little girl Laura, taking her with him as a daughter, a successor to his legacy. Him leaving town with her means that he has successfully stared into the abyss just like the story of the heroic artist, and saw the truth. Instead of cowering, James accepted the truth and allowed it to flow through him. His reward was the last living memento of his dead wife, Mary's pseudo-adopted daughter Laura, that she fell in love with at the Brookhaven Hospital. Lastly, if James acts disinterested in his late Mary and more interested in Maria, he's able to leave town with her in the Maria ending. A subtle yet powerful ending ensues.
Come on. Let's get out of here.
What about Mary?
It's okay. I have you.
They're walking back to James's car outside town, and Maria coughs hard right before they cut to credits. "You should get that cough checked out," he says. Kind of aggressively, honestly.
You'd better do something about that cough.
This leaves James's decision in ambiguity. Players might have thought this was a good ending initially, as James is leaving town, and he rescued somebody who happens to be extremely sexy and practically created to serve him on his quest. Is Maria really having a hangover like she said? Or is she meant to suffer and die just like Mary? My interpretation is that in this ending, James was overtaken by his selfishness, his lustful energy, and on top of that, also never learned the most valuable lessons, that his wife was worth loving, and her life was worth living, no matter the suffering.
I don't know why, but I just love it here. It's so peaceful.
He takes the hot doppelganger to his wife, but in this Dionysian decision, he hasn't accepted punishment for his sins as truly as he might believe. This dualism between the story's many psychoanalyses and the player's fine-tuned psychoanalytical experience helps Silent Hill 2 ascend above many other video games as an actual, respectable work of art and interactive literature. Also, if James actually left town with her, she straight up is gonna die. I'm no prophet, but the cough seems pretty clear-cut to me. If James takes her and leaves town with her, she's gonna die, and he's gonna suffer all over again. Both tales, after drilling deep to their cores, finally present us the answers to the thematic questions presented in the beginning. What happens when someone commits murder? As Raskolnikov puts it, they get what they deserve. Do they suffer for their sins, either in their own secular context or in their own religious context? If they have a conscience, they will suffer. If they feel sorry for the victim, they will suffer. Is punishment necessary? Yes. Because punishment is a form of suffering, and we suffer that we may be redeemed through it. Is punishment even real? Again, if they feel sorry for their victim, they will suffer. That is also to say, is crime real? The answer is a resounding yes. When we choose to believe it doesn't, that would mean right and wrong don't exist on a fundamental, primordial level. They exist only superficially because we created them. And at that point, even the most vicious acts can be rationalized and justified as the best action. So, what happens when you justify murder? Does suffering continue, or does it disappear because you don't feel sorry for your victim? Just like 𝕍𝕀𝕋𝕍𝕆, when you justify pure evil like murder and pretend right and wrong don't exist, you'll be condemning yourself to a fate worse than death. Does morality even exist? Yes, it does. Every character, even 𝕍𝕀𝕍𝕍𝕆, realize, even if it's too late, that morality is way too fundamental to pretend like it doesn't exist. We can use these insights as ambrosia to the soul, food for the spirit, and grow from them. People of all kind, including you, including me, are capable of intelligent, kind, and creative acts. But every single one of us is also capable of selfish, deceitful, and murderous acts as well. We all have a choice to make in life. It's a fundamental choice, a primordial choice, an archetypal choice, bound to our souls from the moment we were conceived. We all suffer. Life is suffering. Life is hard. Life is challenging. Life is brutal. But life is worth living. So then, how will you be redeemed from suffering? Thank you.
Mary.